Council.
Welcome to this episode of the Cybersecurity Council. I am your host, Scott Brammer. In this episode, our special guest is Walter Haydock, the CEO and founder of StackAware. He is going to walk us through 42001, the new ISO standard, and the finer points of AI management. Welcome to the Cybersecurity Council. Our special guest today is Walter Haydock, and he is the founder and CEO of StackAware. StackAware is a leader in artificial intelligence, governance, risk, and compliance. In StackAware's own marketing, it says, "We help you win with AI while protecting your data, your customers, and your reputation." Their core offering, the Artificial Intelligence Management System, that's the AIMS Accelerator, gets companies ISO 42001 ready in 90 days. We're definitely going to be talking about that. Walter Haydock, please say hello to our wonderful audience.
Hello, and thank you very much for having me on the show. Really appreciate you taking the time, Scott.
Well, it's always good to talk to a CEO and founder. It's always good to talk about AI governance. If I may, I'd like to take a further moment to tell everyone about you. So you climbed your way to CEO of an AI governance company by being a difference maker, doing things that matter. And I'd like to take a moment to call that out. This will be a very quick career chronology, but I think it's very relevant. So in 2008, Walter Haydock joined the Marine Corps as an officer working in intelligence and reconnaissance. Hoorah! I myself am a third-generation United States Marine, so I'm uniquely aware that Walter chose a role of consequence, not only within the Marine Corps, but more broadly for our country. In 2010, Walter began one of his first two trips to Afghanistan. Thank you for being forward deployed and taking care of us. In 2013, you helped train the Peruvian Marine Corps. And any time that we are interacting with foreign militaries and doing integration and training, it has its own prestige to it because you're an ambassador for our country. Now, in 2015, Walter started working as a Capitol Hill staffer. Specifically, he worked as a targeting analyst for the National Counterterrorism Center and as a staffer for the Federal Data Program Oversight. So who has the most data in the world? Well, it's the U.S. federal government, and Walter was briefing committees, policymakers, and congresspersons about how to manage it. In 2019, Walter got his MBA from Harvard Business School. In 2021, he joined a venture-backed data security startup doing some product management. And in 2022, Walter launched his own company, StackAware. So thank you for going on a quick career chronology with me. I think people need to hear that to understand your relevance to the community and how you came to be in AI governance. You did it the right way. You did it also the hard way, and I definitely respect that. But I want to ask you, did I do your career chronology justice? Was that a good synopsis of your background?
Yeah, that was a good overview. I guess key thing is that my targeting work was in the executive branch when I was still active duty Marine Corps, and then moved over to the policy side on Capitol Hill in 2015. But that was a dead on chronology otherwise.
Okay, excellent. And there's a subtlety to what you just said. Still being in service, but working with the National Counterterrorism Center, that's important. Okay, so Walter Haydock from StackAware, welcome to the show. What inspired you to create StackAware?
Yeah, so happy to talk about the journey. As you mentioned, I've had experience in a couple different aspects or approaches to data governance. So while working on the Hill, I helped write a bill that was passed into law into 2018, the Department of Homeland Security's Data Framework Act. At a high level, from a policy level, helped the department and its agencies build a consolidated data framework for managing important national security data. And then I kind of backed into tech from an interesting angle and kind of started on the non-technical side and then moved into the technical side, taught myself how to code when I was approaching and exceeding 30 years old, and then went and worked at a couple different tech companies as a product manager. And throughout that time, I identified a series of problems along the way kind of typical founder story is, you are the target customer. And StackAware actually started as a vulnerability management company. And I still think that is a major problem out there in terms of managing known vulnerabilities. Something that I did early on that was a mistake, and something that entrepreneurs who are just starting out should consider in their approach is going right to the product side of things. So that's what I did with StackAware, and I actually have a working vulnerability management product that we still to this day use internally. With that said, it did not have product market fit. I decided in 2023 to pivot both in terms of subject matter from vulnerability management specifically to AI governance, and also go back to a services approach with the end goal of eventually becoming a product company. But there was so much hype around the launch of ChatGPT, and at the same time, so much fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And what I viewed as being incorrect advice that would potentially hamper people from using AI effectively and securely, that I decided that it was worth building a business around it. And that's brought me to where we are today.
So today, AI governance, how do you describe your company's overall vision and mission now that you are in this transformative space?
Yeah, so you actually did a great job early on in encapsulating it in really one sentence, and that is helping companies get ISO 42001 ready in 90 days. And for those who don't know, ISO 42001 is a recently released AI governance standard. It's quite similar to ISO 27001 for those who might be familiar with the information security management system approach. It's a very new standard. StackAware just 2 weeks ago became one of the first ISO 42001 certified companies in the world, and the only AI governance company that I'm aware of that is ISO 42001 certified. So we're already working with 2 other companies right now to get them ISO 42001 ready. And it really provides a framework for governing your artificial intelligence systems in a coherent and comprehensive manner. And then we also have additional offerings related to cybersecurity and privacy risk management. So those are things that we help our customers with as well. ISO 42001 touches on those topics, but it's not highly prescriptive. But we use that as the core approach for all of our engagements, and getting companies ready for that certification is what we do.
90 days, that is a tall feat for any certification. ISO 42001 being brand new, I would like to ask you about serving and helping clients, but I'd like to start with StackAware. How is your journey internally getting the certification?
Yeah, so it was a learning process throughout. Only very recently have the GRC companies started instituting ISO 42001 support within their platform. And actually, I can tell you publicly, one of my customers is one of those companies, Scrut Automation. We are working with them to get them ISO 42001 ready so that they can help their customers on the journey and set the example, walk the walk, so to speak. There were a lot of learnings along the way. We had to build a lot of things internally and didn't really rely on any external tools for 2 reasons. 1, they weren't available, and 2, going through the process of building things from scratch is painful, but at the same time, very instructive. And it gave us a very clear idea of what the challenges would be for other companies along the way. So I wouldn't recommend taking the approach that we took, which is basically just saying, hey, we're going to figure it out along the way. When we did it, that was the only way available. There weren't even like template packs you can buy, which there are now available from other companies. Can't speak to their effectiveness, but we just went from ground zero and went for the certification and just kind of accumulated some learnings and lessons along the way. That was good for us. But now that we've gone through that process, all those learnings, first of all, we package them up on our blog. So we've got a lot of freely available content. And then if you work with us, we will give you white glove service, helping you through those challenges and those hurdles.
So that's both amazing and probably incredibly necessary. Anytime there's a new framework, a new standard, being able to become compliant has got to be a very deliberate choice. It probably requires you being very willful to get that done. And I imagine it requires a very wise and sound certification auditor to assist you to get there, of which is StackAware itself a certification auditor, or are you assisting people with their ISO 42001 journey?
We are not auditors, and we make a conscious decision to not be on that side of the equation. So specifically for ISO audits, there is a requirement that both the external and the internal auditor, we can talk about internal auditing, but the external auditor who grants the certification must be independent from whoever is preparing the controls, who's preparing the management system for review. So we are not on the certification side of things. We partner with two companies. First of all, Shellman, which is StackAware's auditor. We partner with them to help other companies get certified. So they would be the independent assessor, and we would be the advisor, the consultant to get you ready for the process. And then we also work with another company called Mastermind that also has done accredited ISO 42001 audits.
Okay. A client approaches you. They're interested in 42001 themselves. What are parts of your opening gambit? How do you help them assess their own readiness? And take me maybe to like the first 30 minutes of your first conversation with them. What are some of your scoping questions? So you, Walter Haydock, is going, this company needs my help here, here, and here.
Scoping is a very important aspect of the process. And specifically for ISO 42001, you need to have a defined scope for the certification. So some things that I'm very interested in are you building AI models internally? If so, my assessment is that you need, there are certain controls in Annex A of ISO 42001 that are basically mandatory if you're building or fine-tuning your own models. Now, a lot of companies, StackAware included, don't train their own models internally. They rely on third-party SaaS providers exclusively for their AI processing, which is certainly a fine way from a business perspective to approach things. So with that comes an additional set of requirements and considerations from a security, compliance, and privacy perspective. And then there are organizations that are kind of doing everything. They're doing all of the above. They're building their own models. They're using open source ones in their own infrastructure as a service environment, and they're using third-party SaaS tools, including, applications built on top of those, like, GitHub Copilot or, any other sort of Copilot that's on the market. So understanding the tech stack is certainly important. At the same time, the business objectives are also important. So I do have a client that is they are a healthcare company. They process protected health information. So they're going to have a different set of requirements when it comes to AI security and compliance than another company that might be more marketing focused. Their data might be less sensitive. They might be more willing, or they may demand that the results be publicly available, things like that. So understanding the business requirements as well as the technical situation, those are things that I try to establish up front.
You brought up something very interesting. LLMs developing AI tools in-house. There's a lot of companies out there with different needs, but if you're actually developing AI yourself, that probably makes ISO 42001 uniquely intense. You've probably got to be able to prove in certain ways that your LLM or whatever you are developing is fit for purpose, is secured, maybe meets some privacy benchmarks, etc. Could you talk a little bit about the unique implications of building and deploying AI tools internally?
Yeah, that's a great point. Something that I have found is some of the controls of ISO 42001, none of which are technically mandatory. They are all contained in Annex A of the standard. Some of them are uniquely suited to organizations that are building their own AI models. For example, data preparation techniques, data cleaning techniques, labeling, validation, all of these types of things. And it may be difficult to pull that type of information from your vendor if you are merely a consumer. But if you are doing the training, then there's basically no reason why you shouldn't have these pieces of information available. So my assessment is that there are some controls you could potentially omit if you are just a consumer of AI tools. Whereas if you are building AI models yourself, it would be very difficult to justify their exclusion. And StackAware itself did go through, we did get certified with all of the Annex A controls and an additional one that we included. And that was primarily for A, learning purposes, and B, in the future, we may begin fine-tuning our own models for various purposes. And we wanted to have essentially that framework in place to make the rollout of those features an easier thing.
What do you find is the most informative frameworks for AI governance that are out there right now? And I'll spot our audience a few names. So there's the NIST's AI Risk Management Framework. Databricks has very politely and helpfully put out an AI security framework. There's MITRE Atlas on the threat access vector side. ISACA has an artificial intelligence audit toolkit. What does Walter Haydock and StackAware use? What's your framework set? How do you orient?
ISO 42001 is it's a way to build a management system for artificial intelligence. It is less focused on the kind of risk and threat side of things. At the same time, it is not a mutually exclusive framework to anything else. So some of the things that you mentioned are certainly reasonable to incorporate into ISO 42001 into your AI management system. And then another one would be the OWASP Top 10 for LLMs. That's another potential framework for evaluation. Additionally, ISO 42001 calls out the NIST AI risk management framework specifically in the document. So that's certainly compatible. And that framework takes a more risk-based approach, where I would say 42001 takes a more compliance-based approach. Some additional standards to look at would be ISO 23894, which is specifically focused on AI risk management. And ISO 42001 is different than standards like 27001 because it requires certain evaluations, which are called impact assessments, which are different from risk assessments, although the impact assessments can be included in the risk assessments. And these focus on things such as individual and societal impacts of AI, not just organizational risks. So 894 is a good framework for conducting those types of risk assessments. And it's also specifically called out in the 2001 standard. StackAware put together an article that explains kind of how we integrate the risk and impact assessments together and how we recommend doing that. And then another framework that would also be of interest that is also called out in ISO 42001 is ISO 5338, which is specifically focused on AI system lifecycle management. And 5338 gives you a set of considerations from essentially cradle to grave when you're building an AI product or system. And I would recommend looking at that standard as well for anyone who is interested in AI governance.
I'd like to go back to the practical. I'm a company. I am looking to vet an LLM before I integrate it into a product. What do I need to think through?
Yep, great question. And so StackAware actually has an article on this, which I'm happy to send you to include in the show notes. Some things that you would look at. Let's assume that this is a third-party SaaS tool that's hosted by your vendor. Important things to look at would be training. Is this tool training on your inputs? Most of the time, you're going to want the answer to be no, but there are certainly exceptions. So OpenAI, if you're using their application programming interface, by default does not train on the data that you provide to it. You can opt into training if you're processing a high volume of non-sensitive data like weather information, you might consider opting into training to improve the model for everyone. Now, I think the default to no is probably the right approach for most organizations. And I bring that up because if you look at ChatGPT, just on the kind of off the street, if you look at the free version or even the plus version, the paid version, that does train on the inputs by default. So that's something you'll want to opt out from. And actually, I've seen some misconceptions here in that some organizations have advised employees to use ChatGPT without logging in. It is possible to use ChatGPT without actually logging in. So it is true that the inputs would not be attributed to that individual. With that said, there is no way in my understanding to opt out if you are not logged in. So I don't think that is necessarily the right approach because it's still possible to input lots of information that's sensitive to the company that would be trained on in that scenario. So training is kind of number one. Number two would be looking at retention. Going back to the OpenAI example, by default, API inputs are only retained for 30 days, barring a legal hold. So if the government or another company requests a hold on your data, then they will keep it past that time. And 30 days is generally good. Certain organizations, specifically those in healthcare and financial services, can request zero data retention. So basically, it's only in-stride processing. There is no retention of your data whatsoever. So that is an option as well, and probably appropriate for some of those more sensitive use cases. And then also looking at certain types of prompts that trip trust and safety classifiers may be retained for longer periods of time. That is true for Anthropic, for example. So they do have a longer retention period for prompts that trip their trust and safety filters, and they reserve the right to train on those specific prompts that trip their filter. So being aware of that is important. And then kind of the third thing I would look at would be the privacy and compliance aspects of using these tools. So data residency, do you have a data processing addendum in place with the vendor? StackAware does with OpenAI, just for anyone who might be concerned about personal data processing. And, making sure that you are compliant with the appropriate regulations and requirements. And then also just making sure that you're being transparent with your users about how you're processing their data and making sure that they don't get surprised if they learn that you're doing something with an LLM.
Yes, privacy and compliance is very interesting right now. I want to ask you about this particular phrase. Quote, in compliance, end quote. So that's always the goal, to be in compliance. But this can be subjective. You are working with your own teams and processes to shoot the gap. You're then, of course, working with internal and external audit to shoot the gap. How do you reflect on in compliance? How do you get senior stakeholders to a state of peace of mind on this?
Yeah, great question there. There are three ways that I look at compliance frameworks specifically. First of all, there are voluntary standards that have no certification capability. Second of all, there are certifiable frameworks that you can get an external audit confirming you are in compliance. And then third of all, there are laws and regulations which, although you can get an external auditor to give you a thumbs up, that doesn't necessarily give you any sort of legal weight. That is only a marketing tool. So I'll dive into those three in detail and explain my approach for each of them. So the first category, the voluntary standards, are things like the NIST AI risk management framework, the NIST cybersecurity framework. There is no way to get certified against these. I mean, I'm sure there are companies out there that claim to do this, but those aren't really accredited in any kind of meaningful way. Basically, the only way to say you are in compliance here would be some sort of self-assessment, or you could have an outside body say that you are adherent to these frameworks, and that's fine, but just know that there is no objective standard by which you can say we are compliant with the NIST AI risk management framework. So the wording I recommend is saying like we adhere to the NIST AI risk management framework. We use it as the basis for our program. That's certainly, an appropriate way to describe it. Second of all are the external attestations and certifications. The clearest example here would be ISO 42001. You can get an external auditor to confirm that you are meeting the requirements of that standard. And I would say this is primarily a marketing tool. And when I say marketing, I mean like helping you close deals more quickly, because customers will know that you are meeting certain requirements when it comes to your AI management system. And some of their concerns that might come up during a sales conversation will be addressed. And you can say, look, we've had an external auditor that we're meeting the requirements here. And for some customers, that's good. And actually that's an advantage of having a standard that you can be certified against, because you don't need to do the customized security questionnaire every time and, dig into detail about every little thing. You can just say, hey, this organization is implementing these controls. They've been certified by this auditor. Kind of end of story there. Obviously, that doesn't stop organizations from sending security questionnaires, unfortunately.
And I would imagine as part of any sort of 42001 triage assessment, you're doing questionnaires too. So everybody's using some questionnaires.
Yeah. So StackAware, what we do is we basically just say, give us all the information that you have. We don't ask people to fill out questionnaires because that's kind of labor intensive. We, for our clients, we do the hard work. But yes, the clients will, our clients' customers are certainly sending security questionnaires to them. Unfortunately, that practice remains to this day. Yeah. So to bridge from the certifiable frameworks to the laws and regulations, ISO 42001 is actually specifically called out by certain regulations, such as Colorado's SB 205, which was recently passed into law. And SB 205 says that if an organization is compliant with the NIST AI risk management framework or ISO 42001, it will be granted safe harbor under certain provisions of the law. There are very limited circumstances where that applies. And also, this is not legal advice. I'm not an attorney, but that is what the law says. It doesn't exactly tell you what in compliance with means. I would say the strongest argument you could possibly have for being in compliance is having an external accredited auditor grant you certification. That would be the strongest argument. But there are also standards, for example, like the EU AI Act, that there's no certification available that says you are EU AI Act certified. They may exist, but people should disregard those because that's not an accurate characterization. Now, ISO 42001 is under consideration for becoming what's known as a harmonized standard under the EU AI Act. And that would give you a presumption of conformity if it is adopted as a harmonized standard, which it is not yet, to my knowledge. It would give you a presumption of conformity with certain requirements under the law. Now, it's a little blurrier than SB 205, which kind of specifically calls out 42001 right now. And then there are things like HIPAA in the United States. And actually, HIPAA requires its own set of requirements in the security and privacy rule in terms of how you need to handle and protect protected health information. So organizations I see will say they are HIPAA certified or HIPAA compliant. I would say we'll see really is how I would respond to that. We'll see if you get fined by the Office of Civil Rights at Health and Human Services, because really that's how you determine whether you're compliant or not, is if you get fined by a regulator. And the same thing with GDPR. I've seen organizations claim to be GDPR certified or GDPR compliant, to which I'd say, okay, you're compliant until you get fined by the regulator. That would be how I would break down in compliance in that 3-level framework.
I like that you used a combination of gray area and black and white to explain in compliance. Yes, if you are on the naughty list of people being fined, which is getting longer and more active all the time, you're on the wrong side. With the EU, there may not be a due diligence, due care process before you find yourself on the wrong side of the line. You just simply got fined. So it's wise to take Walter Haydock's advice and make sure you're looking at all of the options here. I'm a security guy doing the CISO thing. How does ISO 42001 help me? Does it help me convince my organization to pay attention to some other intellectual property issues that are specific for AI tools? Are there advancements that get me past what ISO 27001 does? Are there benefits to 42001 for me, the local CISO?
Yes, there are. And to sum them up, I would say it's an excellent way to corral your data science and AI teams into following a set of processes that facilitate security, compliance, and privacy. To elaborate on that, in my conversations with a lot of organizations, with some notable exceptions where actually the AI team was the reason that I was in the organization, which is, very forward-leaning of them, in my opinion. Obviously, if the AI team themselves are concerned about security, compliance, and privacy, that's a pretty sophisticated organization right there. But that isn't usually the case. It's usually the security team that is pulling me in. And the AI and data teams are usually, they're innovative people. They have kind of a laissez-faire approach to the compliance side of things. And ISO 42001 gives a clear set of requirements when it comes to data and AI governance that these folks, it's in language that these types of folks would appreciate and understand. And they're probably doing a lot of this kind of, without thinking about it, or just kind of as part of their standard operating procedure, without documenting certain things and without aligning it with a control framework. So it is an effective way for a CISO to basically get involved in the data science and AI operations in a company in a way that says, hey, I'm helping by standardizing your ways of doing business. At the same time, I'm also adding in, a policy that requires data owners to approve certain types of, AI processing to make sure that it meets our risk appetite. I'm making sure that there's an asset inventory of all these AI systems where, that the data or system owners need to keep updated, these types of things. It is a way for the CISO to get into the sausage making of data science and AI, a effective, comprehensive, and mutually beneficial way.
Rules and regulations are changing for AI governance constantly. Country X may ban ChatGPT today. They may allow it as long as the data is locally resident tomorrow. Things are always changing. How do you help corporations navigate all of the changes?
Yeah, that's a great point. Your mention of ChatGPT being banned and then allowed again, that's exactly what happened with Italy. They basically said shut it down and then turned it back on, and then they're OpenAI is under a variety of different GDPR-related investigations from data protection authorities in the EU. I think we're kind of in gray area. We're in uncharted territory when it comes specifically to GDPR application to things like large language models. So that remains to be seen how that turns out. In terms of what StackAware does, is something that is required by ISO 42001 is documenting all the internal and external issues relevant to your AI management system. And one of those external issues includes laws and regulations, but also guidance from regulators, which is a little bit different from a law or regulation. And we maintain a comprehensive database of all of those that we've been tracking over time and have put together, anytime there's a new development, we put together a deep dive article on it on our blog. And then essentially that database of laws, regulations, guidance links out to those requirements or to those deep dive articles. So essentially you can start from a master list, so to call it, of requirements, and then say, this applies, this doesn't apply, we're not SEC regulated, so on and so forth. So these requirements don't apply. And then you can drill down into the specific requirements of each law and how to, in a real world situation, comply. Because, I've written federal laws and, they're very high level, and, where the rubber meets the road is really what is important.
Without a doubt, you are one of the foremost experts on 42001. How do you project it's going to change over time? And let me put some parameters around this discussion. ISO 27001 has been a standard that's been with us for a long time. And it gets opened up for comments and it gets revised about every 10 years. We're dealing in AI governance with GPU chipsets, which are going to rapidly advance, quantum computing, which is beginning to arrive, LLMs, which are changing daily, hourly in some cases, and there's going to be many more emerging properties of AI that's just going to keep coming. So how do you see ISO 42001 changing over time? Is this even a case where the ISO standards organization might say, we already know we're going to need to revise ISO 42001 in just 18 months, so it's on the table? In general, what do you think about the changes that are coming, and how is that going to impact us in governance?
I think that's an excellent point, because if you look at some legislation, like specifically the EU AI Act, that gives a specific number of floating point operations for which a model is trained that would put it in a certain type of category, which is not a timeless parameter. As you alluded to, the technological capabilities of the hardware and software is evolving so quickly that if you kind of throw a dart on a board and hit a number and say, above the threshold, it's this category, below the threshold, it's that category, what that metric means, it could be basically, it might seem trivially high at this point so that it impacts almost no one, but in a few years, it might be trivially low so that it impacts everyone. And SB 1047 in California, which was vetoed, but it had passed the legislature in California, also used the same floating point operations threshold for certain requirements. And that is not a timeless way to do things. I think ISO 42001 did a good job by being sufficiently high level in that it didn't point out specific numerical thresholds or, kind of current ways of developing models so that it wouldn't become obsolete quickly. So I think they did a good job there. With that said, I think it's certainly going to require an update more quickly than 9 years, like you alluded to, for ISO 27001, which was released in, there's the 2013 version, and then there was the 2022 version. So there's basically 3 full certification cycles for companies. There's still companies right now that are on the 2013 versions. I would say, I think it makes sense for ISO to revisit one, maybe on like 1 certification cycle, so maybe 3 years from its first date of publication. That would be my recommendation. Obviously, they have some other efforts going on. For example, 27090 and 27091, which are not standards; they're just advisory documents. But those talk about security and privacy for artificial intelligence systems. So those are under development right now. So those will be good sources of guidance. And then also 42005 which is specifically focused on AI impact assessments. Those, I think that will provide additional guidance to the community, but I think it makes sense to revisit ISO 42001 sooner than 9 years.
Sooner than 9 years. The certification process, no matter what certification you are working on, needs to be done carefully. It needs to be done with diligence and attention. That's a very deliberate activity. In the last few weeks, I've talked to several companies that have achieved a 42001 like yourself. It was brand new for them as well. One was an ISO data governance company, so that makes sense. And another one was a company that does security scanning and penetration testing, etc. Which brings me to this question. Your internal and external auditors have to be qualified. They have to know what they were doing. So when this security company told me they'd achieved a 42001, personally, I was highly skeptical. I was like, I kept these mental gymnastics to myself. I did not say this in the public, but I was like, probably had an unqualified auditor doing this work. That was just my guess right off the cuff in the moment. My question to you is, how many good auditors are out there, and how is StackAware making sure that companies can be united with the right ones?
Yeah, so a key thing to look for in auditors is accreditation. There are, in the United States, to my knowledge, 2 accredited auditors, and they are accredited by different bodies. So, and then I'll preface this by saying that both of these organizations are partners of StackAware. They're not financial. We don't get any money from them. We are just essentially no fee partners. We don't pay each other. So just keep that in mind for everybody who's listening to this, so you understand my perspective. But Shellman, which is StackAware's auditor and one of our partners, is accredited by the ANSI National Accreditation Board. So that is a very well-known standards organization. They, ANSI produces standards on all sorts of things, from like safety glasses to AI governance. And then StackAware's other partner, Mastermind, is accredited by the International Accreditation Service, which is separate from the ANAB. So accreditation from a national accreditation body is something I would look for when choosing an auditor. And there are several other organizations that are in the process of getting their accreditation along the way. I'm talking to many of them as we speak. I would recommend for now that you focus on an accredited auditor, of which there are very few right now.
Walter, all of your answers today have been thorough, very competent, definitely been enjoyable to talk to you. I was hoping we could spend some of these last couple of minutes together. I'd like to ask you a little bit about your personal development and how you found your way to StackAware. How did you adapt some lessons learned from the Marine Corps to StackAware?
Something that I kind of regret doing was not trying to start a company right out of the military. Now, that is doing things on hard mode. That is difficult. And many people advise me, go work in a corporate setting to figure out how things are done. And then, if you want to start your own company, then go ahead and do that. I think there are some benefits to doing that from a cultural perspective. So Marines do and communicate in certain ways that really aren't acceptable in any kind of the modern world. If you're savvy enough, you'll quickly understand, how things are communicated. At the same time, I feel like I unfortunately learned some bad lessons working in the corporate world, where, in the Marine Corps, if you were to ever show up to a meeting or, God forbid, a briefing for a mission, and you were unprepared, you might get blasted, you might get personally berated on the spot. You also might get fired on the spot. And I have literally seen that. One senior officer in one of my battalions fired his operations officer on the spot because he was unprepared for a major training exercise, which was the right decision by the senior officer. He said, "You are not ready. We are going to war. You are fired." I have literally never seen nor even heard of that happening in the private sector. And frankly, I wish it did happen more, because Marines are inculcated with a sense of accountability for not just personal accountability, but leaders own the outcomes for the organization. And really, in the private sector, the only people who I see behave that way are majority owners of the company, because there's kind of no other way to operate. If you're the majority owner, there's no one else to blame. But aside from that, I have seen that type of accountability be quite rare. And that is something that military veterans, specifically from the Marine Corps, have a huge head start over other folks in terms of, that there's just no blaming other people. And that would be the biggest lesson learned. And then also in terms of decisiveness and decision-making, ability to develop the situation and deal with ambiguity. These are all important things that you learn in the Marine Corps. And for some reason, there's kind of this stereotype that military people, just kind of only do what they're told and just need to, they need to receive very clear orders and things like that. And from my perspective, that's just not, especially for Marines. Even the most junior Marine understands that
Adapt and overcome.
Yeah, adapt and overcome. And also, if your squad leader needs to come over and tell you to clean your rifle, there's something going on. There's something wrong here. You should know to do that on your own. So taking initiative, these are all valuable things from military service, and specifically in the Marine Corps that I found.
I always have time for Marine Corps leadership stories. You got an MBA at Harvard, though, too. So you were definitely up-leveling yourself. How did your MBA from Harvard make you CEO ready?
Controversial answer. It didn't. It did not. An MBA, specifically my MBA experience, taught me a couple things. One, it taught me how to do financial modeling and analysis, which, at this stage of my startup is not that important. I just, I kind of understand the concepts and things like that. It also taught me a lot of business terminology. What is a P&L statement? What is EBITDA? So I would be kind of up to speed in conversations with other business people. Aside from that, though, I don't think I see the direct correlation with being a bootstrap startup CEO. It's not designed to prepare you for that. It's designed to prepare you to be a manager in a large organization, whether it be Fortune 500 or consulting or banking or something like that. People advised me before I went that is the purpose of a Harvard MBA. And that's great. If that's what you want to do, then it's a great tool to prepare. It just wasn't the right tool to prepare me for my path. So I would tell specifically veterans who may have some uncertainty about, jumping straight into the private sector. I would say you can't always go back to do your MBA. You can't do it if you're 40 years old. They just don't want people that old, whether they say it or not. They don't want people that old. But think hard about what you're going to get out of an MBA and, consider alternative paths, whether it be, just kind of private coaching, business coaching, or going through some online courses and things like that.
Thank you for the candor. Walter Haydock, CEO of StackAware, thank you for being our special guest today. I have learned that you are unstoppable. Hoorah, Semper Fi. I definitely wish StackAware great success on its AI data governance mission. And the Cybersecurity Council will be available to support you with whatever you need. Any closing remarks, my friend?
I appreciate your time. And if you're interested in following along on our journey, go to blog.stackaware.com. StackAware.com. I put out a free newsletter 2 to 4 times a week and go really in depth on all of these topics. So thank you for having me on the show and really appreciate the conversation.
Thank you, Walter. Welcome to the Cybersecurity Council. This council strives to showcase unique cybersecurity leadership stories. Its mission is to demystify and simplify cybersecurity across the entire business landscape. Best practices, lessons learned, operational recommendations, it's all here. Brought to you by the Cybersecurity Council, LLC, Brian Green and myself, Scott Brammer, will be your hosts. We have come in from the cyber wilderness, not just to share what we have learned, but to find and elevate some of the most important voices in cyber. Brian is a former Division I college football player who has experience across many cybersecurity software startups. He has a successful exit on his resume too. He's also the founder and president of this very community, the Cybersecurity Council. Myself, Scott Brammer, I'm a former Marine and active CISO, and I have 3 patents in cyber and risk. As hosts, we are here to elevate best practices and strengthen the cyber community, both for the community itself and its allies. The Cybersecurity Council has had auspicious beginnings here in the Austin, Texas community, but we are already going worldwide. Everyone should be a cyber practitioner. The views expressed on this podcast, either by us or by our guests, are our own, and they do not necessarily reflect the view of our organizations. This podcast is intended as a forum for professional knowledge, but it is not legal or regulatory advice. Always consult your legal professionals for legal and regulatory matters. And now,
assemble the council.